Hello everybody and welcome back to our third challenge run, which is StarOcean: The Last Hope. Really quick, I'd like to thank everyone who has shown your love and support of my first two challenge runs of Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 12. With the support you guys have given me, it's given me a lot more motivation to keep doing these challenge runs, and I'd probably keep doing these challenge runs anyway, as it's really awesome to see how we can play the game the way it's not meant to be played. You'll be able to find a walkthrough guide that I've been using for this playthrough, as well as my video for my other two challenge runs in the description below. So let's go ahead and jump into it. For this challenge run, can you beat StarOcean: The Last Hope using only party members' damage? So what this means essentially is we are going to be relying on the AI to do all of the damage for us. I figured this would be a particularly challenging run because with a lot of main bosses in this game, there's things known as weak points, to where unless you break or target that weak point, your damage is going to be considerably reduced. So along with only using team members' damage, we're going to go ahead and add on some more rules for this challenge run as well. These rules include output damage needs to come from party members' auto battle, the controlling character can't deal any damage, we cannot run from any battles, we cannot use any item creation whatsoever. There's no pickpocketing, no buying from shops, and as always, no glitches, exploits, hacks, mods, free or paid DLC if there is any. And our victory condition is to beat the final storyline boss. I went ahead and cut out most of the cinematics, cutscenes, and random battles to prevent spoilers if this is your first experience with StarOcean: The Last Hope. So finally jumping into the gameplay, we crash land on the planet called Eos, where we go outside the ship, try and figure out what is wrong, and then we encounter a not so good looking bug where we find out our plasma rifles have no effect on him. Edge sees a sword in the ground, decides to pick it up, and here we go. He is now a swordsman. This brings us to, I believe it's our first and only mandatory fail of the run, where we don't have any party members here, but we do have to kill these bugs with Edge. I'm not going to count this as a failed run, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. I spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours grinding in this area and gathering all of the harvesting points that we can use with Raimi. This is going to be our main source of recovery items through the playthrough, since we can't use any shops to buy any recovery items. Throughout this playthrough, we're going to assume that we are gathering all the chests as they become available. So by going to the main map and looking around, you can see where the chests are. So we're going to go ahead and assume that we collect them all on our way through. Progressing the storyline, we go ahead and head over to the beach where I believe we are level 7, maybe 7.5, or just right on the verge of 7. And we will encounter our first additional party member, FaZe. FaZe is pretty good for early game with his Earthglaive. It is a massive AoE that knocks enemies into the air. Our first boss fight starts off against Armoros, where you'll notice on the right side of his body he has this big looking shield. It really helps to target the weak points, but with the AI doing all the damage for us, they're not exactly great at doing that. So one of the things that we'll want to try and do is set everyone's combat to attack enemies full force without using MP. So that way, when it comes time for that shield or weak point to actually break or be exposed, then we change everyone's combat back to gain up on all enemies while using MP, so that way they can dump all their skills on the boss for some massive damage. So also throughout this fight, I'm using some blackberries on both Raimi and FaZe to help recover that MP, so that way when it finally does break, then we'll have the additional skills to damage the boss. This boss definitely took some more time than what I thought it would, so it was kind of starting to sink in the back of my mind of, is this challenge run even doable? But you guys will see later in the run if we're able to complete it or not. So continuing to stay out of the way and let the party members do all the damage, the first boss, Armoros, does eventually fall. We get a nice amount of experience, we level up, and then from there we will go ahead and make our way all the way back to camp, where, as it turns out, a new fortress appears. Turns out the race that FaZe is Eldarian, and they provide us with a new base and ship repairs. Only the highest ranking officials of the USTA knew about the Eldarians' existence and are friends of Earth. And as you might have guessed by this fortress that just now magically appears, their technology is far more advanced than Earth's. To proceed, we'll talk to Commander Grafton, followed by Supreme Commander Goggin, and then back to Commander Grafton for a cutscene. With the new and improved ship, the SRF-003 Countess, we are now ready to explore uncharted planets. I do go back and do a little bit more farming for herbs because we do need some more recovery items since, again, we can't buy from any shops. With the Countess repaired, that means that the item creation is now available. We'll go ahead and go to the item creation and examine it, and we will be greeted by Welch, who is our liaison to the USTA headquarters. Fun fact about Welch is the voice actor is Laura Bailey, who also voices Sarah in Final Fantasy XIII and Jodie in Pillars of Eternity. After choosing to launch the Countess, we'll go ahead and come across our second planet of this playthrough, planet Limerus. Limerus is an underdeveloped planet that basically dates to the Stone Age. The monsters here offer a nice EXP increase compared to those of Eos, so we do spend some time here grinding as well. Once we're ready, we'll go ahead and go into the village known as Triom Village, where the residents think that we're gods coming in a celestial ship. Proceeding to the village elder, we meet Gimdo. Gimdo is plagued with the Boculus sickness, which you may remember from StarOcean 1 if you've played it. If left unchecked, I guess you could say that you'll get really stoned. As the conversation drags out, Gimdo's granddaughter Limel barges through the door and gives him a flower. That's very sweet. Limel says she's headed up north to try and find the cure for her grandpa. And naturally, with the grandpa being worried about the granddaughter, he asks us to take care of her and help her with her journey. Limel then joins the party, and this is a fantastic opportunity for some more leveling, and we will be controlling Limel for the foreseeable future as she has one key symbology, or magic, if you will, known as healing. This is going to allow us to grind a lot more and take on some more ambushes without depleting our recovery items. Using the save point right outside of Elenair Citadel, we go ahead and proceed inwards. This is a fantastic area on the first floor to build our battle bonus board. So in order to get ambushed in battle, you need 2 or more creatures stacked on top of each other when they engage with you or you engage with them. Doing so will cause a green tick to appear on your battle board, which will give you +1 SP or skill point for every battle that you do. So if we have a full board of 14 green jewels, then we will get 14 SP per battle that we do. And also keep in mind, this board can break every time you either get incapacitated or you get crit. So it's very important to not let either of those happen. With this particular type of challenge run, it's not really that big of an issue. Most of the time when my board broke, it's because I reloaded a save file after I messed up. And so reloading a save file or exiting the game and then loading back in will reset your bonus board altogether. When starting combat, the initial battle won't give you any sort of green jewel. It's the successive battles that will give you a jewel, as you see here. The board will just keep going up one by one. There are 3 other types of jewels that we can get on our bonus board, but we're not going to go over that. So after solving the mini puzzle, this brings us to the boss of this area. We'll go ahead and save right outside the room, and then we will proceed and fight the Dragon Newt. So just like the random battles, we're going to control Limel, and we'll keep rolling around everywhere because there's a battle trophy that you can get for rolling a certain amount of distance with Limel, which is a little bit weird. Every single character has 100 battle trophies that you can achieve while only in battle, so I figured why not, we'll go ahead and start on this one for Limel. So if you notice, my bonus board is completely empty. I actually beat this boss, and then I went to town and accidentally bought something from a shop because I was debating about doing the no buying from shops rule, and then I decided, you know what? Let's go ahead and stick with that rule. So I reloaded the game, and of course it emptied the bonus board, which I completely forgot about again at the time. This boss didn't really hit that hard. We used Limel to stand back at max distance most of the time and try and heal everyone as needed, and the boss eventually fell. Once done, we'll go ahead and proceed to the other side of the chamber, and we see a chest that we can't open at the moment. We'll need to come back for this. We'll go ahead and use the curtains to go all the way down to the first floor and out the back of the castle and go into the next town. We reach our destination for the moment, and Limel finds her friend known as Ludi. Limel asks Ludi to teach her the symbology method to recover from the Boculus sickness. Not knowing what that means, Limel has an idea to go back and speak to her grandpa, as he apparently knows everything. In order to recover from the sickness, she gives us a stone that needs to be essentially absorbed or infected by the source of origin of the Boculus sickness. He tells us that he doesn't know, but he also tips us off that another celestial ship appeared a couple months back. And you guessed it, we found our next destination. By now we have the fire ring in our inventory, which will allow us to pass the glacier boulders that are located in the northeast section of the zone that is north of us, which will allow access to the celestial ship. So we head north and make our way over the river through the snow and off to the celestial ship we go. Upon arriving at the ship, Edge and friends are sadly disappointed that it's not the Aquila. So naturally we head inside, and this again is another great place to start leveling up. Not far in, we'll go ahead and come across a center console, and we access it to view the past recordings that happened on the ship. We view what appears to be enemies coming through the elevator to attack the crew members. Not fully understanding what they're seeing, the party gets put on high alert. Progressing further into the ship, we come across a very powerful skill manual known as Critical Hit, and I think you can take a guess at what that does. After getting the skill manual, I figured this would be a pretty good time to use the HP boost skill manual that we got from a previous chest and go ahead and throw it on Edge, and then we will go ahead and teach the critical hit over to Raimi. Now, in hindsight, I wish that I didn't use the critical hit on Raimi, as I do end up swapping her out for another ranged character later in the game. But it is what it is, we'll move on and we'll deal with it. We come across our second boss fight of this planet. Barac absorbs water elements and halves earth elements, so this particularly means that phase isn't very beneficial for this fight. We want to make sure that we turn off Phase's ability to use ice needles, but it's definitely okay if we stick him on using Earthclave, even though it does about 50% damage. This boss is weak versus fire, which would only be useful for Limel, but since we're controlling Limel for this fight, then we're not able to hit its weak spot. We could switch over to a different character so that way Limel could be on auto battle using Firebolt, which we don't really do because I'd prefer to be on healing duty. The weak spot for this boss is on its spike, and I don't actually recall if the party was able to hit the weak spot enough for us to do some major damage. So we just do our old-fashioned routine of staying back and healing and letting the party do their thing. One of the pro tips for the boss fights is there's two ways to heal the party. Of course, there's items and then there's symbology. If you use an item, that activates really quickly, so if you need to heal someone up really fast, I would usually use an item like a blueberry first, following the use of symbology like healing. The boss's damage output can be quite surprising sometimes, especially if he hits two characters at the same time with his tail swipe. With this particular boss, it's much of the same, where we just keep everyone healed and the boss will eventually die, but not before burning through some of our blackberries and recovery items. With the boss defeated, we'll go ahead and make our way back to town and see if we were in time to save Limel's grandpa from being turned into stone. Unfortunately, as we arrive back in town, the stone structure in the middle has a flower on it. I guess we all know who that was. After the cutscene, we go around to do some more harvesting, and then we head back to the Calnus, where our next stop is Cardionon. Cardionon isn't really so much a planet as it is a really, really big spaceship, kind of like the mothership in StarCraft. With being in a new area comes new EXP rewards. The Cardionon ship is a absolutely fantastic place for some more leveling, as there is a recovery point, sphere, thingy, whatever you want to call it, deeper in the ship, so we can consistently grind to our heart's content. So this took me a little bit to figure out. So once we are in this frozen room here, there is a exclamation point on the map which does contain a key card on the body, but it is frozen, and we need to unfreeze the body, which we need to activate the control console with a lightning ring. Now, earlier we did pass by a door or a circuit board thing that we have to actually charge the lightning ring on, and I didn't know that, so I probably spent a good 20 minutes running around just killing things. But once we activate the console, it unfreezes the room, which causes a lot of mobs to spawn, so this is also a good opportunity to build up the SP bonus board if you need to. And then once we get the key, that will allow us to progress further into the ship. The cutscene plays out where we are trapped in a room, and Bacchus comes to our rescue, also known as the big metal giant on the ship. Bacchus is an absolute powerhouse of a ranged character. You remember a little bit ago when I mentioned that I shouldn't have used the critical hit on Raimi? And on another character, well, it turns out Bacchus was that character. He is extremely strong. Continuing deeper into the ship, we come across the armed dragoons, which is one of the coolest mobs in the entire game, in my opinion. These things look absolutely amazing, but they can also critical hit you like no one's business. Not much further after the double armored dragoons, we come across the Cardianon ship's boss, Sahariel. Sahariel is weak versus water and thunder, and he resists fire and wind, but he doesn't absorb anything. So even if we have our characters use symbology, we'll still at least be doing some damage. But for the purposes of this fight, we are still going to be controlling Limel, staying at a distance, and healing up our party members. So with this boss's particular weak spot, it is directly in front of him. So in order to really have our party members hit it, we have to put our DPS characters in the middle of danger, which isn't really beneficial. So we're going to be spending a long time on this fight. In terms of difficulty, this fight wasn't actually hard at all. If anything, it just took a lot of time. With the HP boost skill manual on Edge, he plays a really valuable role in trying to tank a lot of damage, and he just doesn't really die, especially once we have the auto healing skill manual on him later in the game. I do swap the tactics on everyone quite often for gang up on enemies using MP and without using MP, because his vulnerability zone is really only targetable for a couple seconds at a time. When he rears up, he'll expose a weak point that's on his chest. And after 12 minutes, this boss will finally fall. After leaving the Cardianon warship, we end up going back to Eos and do some more herb gathering, so that way we can replenish our recovery items. After resupplying on items, our next destination is EN2, the home of the Morphous. While warping our way over to EN2, we encounter a mysterious anomaly and a black hole, which causes some slight turbulence, you might say. Needless to say, things go wrong and we appear on Earth, of all places, but not from the present time, from a past time, 1957 to be exact. So if you recall from the game opening cinematic after hitting on New Game, it is revealed that the Earth is basically no longer habitable on the surface due to nuclear bombs reigning supreme on the surface. So with us going back to 1957, totally accidentally, I might add, this is pre-pollution. Edge and a few party members decide to head outside the ship and take a look around while the others stay on the ship. With the local army showing up, Edge and friends start to get a bit worried about the crew members left on the ship. We are then ambushed by Professor Klaus, who says, "Hey, I got one of your friends over in my garage." So we go ahead and go over there where we find Limel, which is actually pretty good because we need her healing abilities. Professor Klaus mentions he has a way for us inside the base, so we go ahead and take him up on his offer because he seems like a pretty trustworthy guy. So he makes a call, and then we are inside the base, where we get sent to a cell, and Bacchus breaks us out. The layout in here is just a hallway with a whole bunch of rooms, so go ahead and press square, collect the chests, and then we will eventually come across our new party member, Miracle.
Let's go! Meow! Meow!
In the next corridor, we get stopped by the powers that be, and they say that they only want to examine the ships, that way they can create a clean, pure, non-polluted energy source for the planet to solve the energy issue. With Edge experiencing sympathy overload, he went ahead and handed over the ship's core, and FaZe is not too happy.
Ready the equipment. We will begin experiments immediately.
We then willingly walk into a cell where Raimi rejoins our party.
Thank God.
What happened? Edge, you perv!
After getting slapped into the fourth dimension, the reactor starts to overload, and it's time for us to hightail it out of here. No pun intended, Miracle. As we make our escape, there are some chests to grab, and there is no timer, so feel free to fight all the mobs on the way to the ship. Once we're back on the Countess, another cutscene occurs, and we are now in our original timeline, and our next destination is the planet Roke. Making our way through the map, we come across a pretty familiar scene to most of you, I imagine. Proceeding through the town, we enter another cutscene where we hear a scream, and this is our first encounter with Sarah of the Featherfolk. She doesn't join our party just yet, so we go ahead and exit the town and go to the tent where FaZe receives a lovely gift, and Limel has no problems not keeping her opinions to herself.
You look really bad in it, Kay.
After the cutscene at the tent, we receive the reins to try and tame some bunnies. During the cutscene, Raimi actually falls to the ground in sickness, where it turns out that she is suffering from a plague-like sickness similar to the Boculus. For some reason, Sarah was sleeping in the next room and overheard our commotion, so she came to check it out, and she advises us that the remedy is actually sitting with the king in his castle. So we go ahead and take the ferry over to the castle and confront the king for the remedy. The king tells us it'll take a little bit of time for the remedy to be completed, so we go ahead and loot the castle, and then Sarah's just like, hey, the remedy should be done by now, so let's go ahead and go back to the king. So we do, and then he tells us that the remedy has actually been stolen. We track the perpetrator over to the Colosseum, where we are forced into a one-on-one fight. Now, because this fight is mandatory, as far as I know, you cannot do anything with this battle except beat him, so we go ahead and do that, and I don't count this as breaking the rules since it is a mandatory fight. After recovering the remedy, we go ahead and give it to Raimi, who is instantly feeling better. Now that Ray is feeling better, we can finally go ahead and tame a bunny so we can cross the quicksand desert. Our goal here is to go ahead and proceed all the way to the west and then north over to the Purgatorium. Once in the Purgatorium, we can only go so far before we encounter a particular wall that bars our path. From here, we head over to Elena, who the party recalls was Sarah's friend, who apparently can see the future. So we go to the town called a Trop, and then we go over to Elena's house, where we are magically teleported into an underground passage. A few more cutscenes unfold, and Elena tells us what our purpose is for being on the planet. When morning dawns, we go ahead and exit the cave through the back entrance, and we are confronted with Muria. Muria plans to tell us that her goal is to kill Crow, and she will join us for as long as it takes until she meets that objective. Muria is mostly a DPS symbologist, but she does go into melee range with the auto battle and pretends to whack stuff with her wand. It's really weird how the AI does this. Running our way back to the Purgatorium, we now have the item used to lower the door, and this will lead us to our pseudo-boss fight, the Guardian Beast. The Guardian Beast doesn't really do anything special. He mostly revolves around physical attacks, and he is weak to water, fire, thunder, and darkness. Now, if you have a full melee party, this kind of could prove a little bit challenging, but with our current makeup controlling Muria for healing, this fight is really easy and falls within a couple minutes. A couple floors down and a couple puzzles later, we come across the boss fight Tamiel, which I think we all knew was coming. The fight starts off with facing 2 waves of ads, and then we will go on to the actual boss fight Tamiel. This is a good opportunity for us to build up our bonus board, because we do get ambushed twice. The fight against Tamiel isn't particularly challenging. He does continuously summon ads if you kill all of them, so just by focusing on the boss and leaving the ads up, I think was the best strategy that I used for this fight. That also means with leaving the ads up, there's going to be a lot more damage incurring on the party, so I really have to try and stick to healing properly and possibly using items and then symbology to keep everyone up. But after 14 minutes of this battle, we finally do beat it. We then proceed back to the Calnus for one of the funniest cutscenes in the game, in my opinion.
Finally! Good! Were you guys out having a picnic or what? What's this? Ah! You guys just keep on multiplying! This time it's the sexy big sister type, huh? What a body! Those are some prime assets! Hey, Edge! What's with this scandalous behavior? I thought I raised you better than this!
With our disintegration rings running a little bit low on charges, we go ahead and head back to Lemurus, and then we go to the town up north to give them a recharge. Once that's done, we go ahead and fly back over to Eos, where Welch advises that they have lost contact with the USTA base. So we go ahead and go over, and this is the part that I was dreading the most throughout this entire playthrough. I thought that this run was just going to flat out fail right here. This fight is so difficult. There are many YouTube guides and strategies on this particular fight alone. So we'll go ahead and get into it on what I did. First off, I made sure that we had most of our recovery items near max, if not max already, which is again obtained from the harvesting points with Raimi. So with these particular ambushes, it's really hard to stay in the back and not get targeted, because with getting ambushed, all of the enemies are spread out around you. So there's always going to be an enemy or two within the immediate vicinity of the healer. And this means that everyone is just going to die over and over and over. Not to mention, this is also a battle of attrition, so as the MP goes down, I need to try and use blackberries to recover their health. When they die, if I use a fresh sage, it will restore 20% of their MP, so sometimes I do opt just to let the character die, and that is a strategy that I'll be using in later boss fights as well.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
This was a terrible moment. I was really confident that I wasn't able to get everyone up after this. I tried to lure the remaining mobs over to one side while resurrecting Miria and park her over on the other side to try and not get aggro from the remaining mobs. I was pretty happy to see that the strategy worked and that I was able to start recovering the potential wipe. And then this happened.
No!
I decided to res Edge first, as he would have the highest HP pool for getting targeted by the mobs, and then I'd try and get some DPS up. This was a really, really big turning point in the fight, to where I thought that I was like, hey, I might actually be able to do this now. I was really banking on there not being another ambush, because it would have been really terrible. We went through so many recovery items. We were running dangerously low. I was doing a lot of using a recovery item followed by symbology, so that way I can have the quickest turnaround for everyone's HP bar. And after 40 minutes, I finally clear the phantoms. This was the first real challenge of the game, and this really started to sow the seeds of doubt. Proceeding into the next area, the Mega Insect Warren, we go ahead and collect all the chests, and then we will come across the Grigori Amoros Manifest. This boss was absolutely insane. If I thought the phantoms were hard, this fight took it to a whole new level. Towards the end of this fight, I ran out of every single recovery item I had. And my bonus board? We'll forget about that. So the hardest part about this fight is the ads. Just like Tamiel, as soon as you kill all the ads, he will summon more. And these ads have several abilities. One, they can do a AoE silence on your characters, which isn't a big issue at the start of the fight because everyone has full MP and you are most likely not going to be having characters stacking on top of each other. For this fight, we have Edge and Sarah who can use Cure Condition, which is absolutely necessary for this fight. The ads will also physically attack someone, and they will shoot out about 6 spikes around them, and those spikes deal massive damage. I think it's like 1800 damage apiece. And last but not least, Earthglaive, which is borderline unavoidable. And then the boss will also cast Claws of Fury, which is a heavy-hitting melee attack, which he will target a melee usually, and then use his claws and pound on the ground, which it does decent damage, I guess. With Edge's high HP pool, it doesn't really affect him too much, so it's pretty manageable. He will also cast Aura Rings, which targets a player, and 5 rings appear on the ground. Now, you do have the ability to move to that character, assuming they're not doing any sort of casting or attacking, and you can actually move them out of that AoE, which we do a lot in the later half of the fight. This boss's weak point is his tail, which we were never able to expose. This would require us to get preferably a ranged character behind him, and then we would set that character to gang up on foes using MP, and hopefully they'll use their damaging abilities on the tail. But with the ads the way they are, it was really hard to keep the ranged alive, so that wasn't really a viable strategy for us. Towards the very end, we end up using Edge to do all of the damage, and with Edge, he's only hitting for about 50 to 60 per hit, and with the AI, he runs away and then he runs to the enemy and does like a charge swing attack, which only does like 60 damage. And in doing that, he will actually hit the ad most of the time. So we probably had another 10 to 15 waves of ads on this entire fight. And we tried to keep our healer to the very edge, and the ads would only attack Edge. It was extremely hard to pull off, and we barely managed to do it. After about 30 to 45 minutes, we really started to notice some static moves that the enemy AI was doing. For instance, this area was big enough to where we can kind of sit our healer on the very edge, and we would continuously try and target the boss only with 1 ad left up, so that way he wouldn't summon the ads. But the issue with this is the melee as well as the other AI ranged have to be on auto battle in order for us to do damage, because once again, if we use a character's skills to do damage, that violates the rules. So all of our ranged DPS is going to consistently try and go into melee range, and they're going to be targeted by the boss and the ads, and they just keep dying until we are completely out of fresh sage. After about an hour on this fight, we have used most of our fresh sage, and we are actually using it to recover MP. So we again readjusted our strategy, and eventually towards the very end, the last hour of the fight, yeah, you heard me right, there's an hour and then another hour. This was almost a 2-hour fight. Once we were completely out of fresh sage and MP items, we control Edge, and because he has the auto healing, we tried to continuously run around the boss, just letting the auto healing tick for 500 or so on him to help save some MP on Limel, who was our last remaining healer. We ended up sticking her on manual, so every time we controlled Edge to regain the HP, Limel would stay out of combat range. As I swap over to Edge, he lands the final hit on the boss. I am so glad to be done with that boss. We spent another 30 to 45 minutes gathering the harvest points to refill our recovery items. With the Grigori gun, we are finally able to get on the Countess and set sail to our true destination, EN2. In terms of aesthetics, EN2 was probably my most favorite place in the game. Everything looked so polished and so technically advanced. This was a really, really awesome city to explore. During the cutscenes, we get some information that we need to go and talk to X. Now, we think X is a person, but it's actually more so an entity rather than a being. When the cutscenes conclude, we need to take a trip over to the graveyard and examine the gravestone, which leads us to the tree up top on the stairs, where it will give us the wind ring, which is required for storyline progression. With the ring in hand, we will go ahead and go to the elevator and use the elevator to go to the old road to the sanctuary, where the wind ring is required to blow away the vines and allowing us to proceed. The enemies here can be a little bit challenging if you're under leveled, so go ahead and level up here if you need to. I bypassed all of the mobs in this area and just collected the treasure chests and then straight up to the boss. This next Grigori, known as Kokobeel, can be a pretty big roadblock for most players. He has several mechanics to where it's really hard to deal damage to him. You'll start off the fight surrounded by several ads. There's going to be 4 groups, and only 3 of the groups are able to be dealt damage, so in order to expose the boss's weak spot, 3 of those 4 groups have to die. Now, the way I was thinking about this is most of the time those ads are going to be surrounding him, so if I were to just target the boss directly using some form of AoE attack, then that would damage all the ads at the same time, while still achieving what I need to expose his weak point. And following that strategy, it actually worked out pretty well. For this, I ended up using Bacchus, and specifically the Termination ability. With Bacchus's Termination, he will fly up into the air and unleash a large ray attack on the enemy, and this is actually pretty good because it's indirect survivability. So what I mean by that is when these ads go out and attack the characters, it's mostly they're going in a line. So if Bacchus jumps up into the air, most of the time that ad won't actually hit Bacchus. So pretty cool indirect survivability. But more so, the Termination does exactly what I need it to. It's a really big AoE, it hits everything, and it does all the damage. And it was this particular fight, as I mentioned earlier, when I used the critical hit on Raimi and I wanted to use it on Bacchus, it's because of this Termination ability. So as the fight dragged on, it was really hard to keep a third person up. Edge is relatively fine because of the HP boost, and then with Bacchus, I was consistently having to try and use End Shelter to try and make it to where he wouldn't die to the boss's attack when all of his ads just focus on one target. Bacchus would just get absolutely wrecked. So I'd have to keep in shelter on him at least 1 to 2 stacks, and then the other 2 stacks would be a attack buff, or enhance in this case. So I focused all my time trying to keep Edge and Bacchus alive and just kept the other DPS character dead, as it didn't really make sense. It was just too hard to keep them up. And while this edited footage might make this look easy, this was actually a really hard fight, and it was almost 26 minutes until the boss was able to be downed. These later boss fights are becoming increasingly hard because we only have 1 HP boost on one character. We don't have one for any of our other characters that we use, so it's really, really easy for our DPS classes to just straight up die. We are now set to go to the final area of the game, the KNX Obscurus. Now, once we arrive on this planet, we are able to use the teleporter that's on the planet to warp to and from any of the towns that we previously visited. So we take this opportunity and we go ahead and use the harvesting points to refill our recovery items. So from the point to where we land on KNX Obscurus all the way to the Palace of Creation, I do not fight any of the random battles because I wanted to see if the game was beatable at the level that I'm currently at. So we skip everything, and this was a really big mistake, I guess, and you'll see later on. Upon reaching the Palace of Creation, we will go ahead and use the save point and then proceed up the stairs. Do keep in mind there is no save point beyond this area all the way up until the final boss. So if you die in this area, you will have to redo everything here. And you may be wondering why I would say that, and that's because I did die. The very last area up to the final boss, I somehow encountered an enemy that had jesters in it, and the jesters just one-shot my entire party. So yeah, that was about an hour's worth of progress lost. So after having to reload to my previous save before even entering the palace, I decide that I'm only going to collect the chests that give me weapons or armor. There's also a chest that gives a attack up skill manual, which we immediately use on Bacchus, and we increase his damage a metric buttload. So now his termination is hitting for 2 to 3 times what it normally was. We are at level 48 going into the last couple of fights of the game, and the game time's at 140 hours right now. This isn't how much time I actually put into the game. I left the game on a lot for several days so that way I wouldn't lose my board bonus, since every time you load the game, it wipes your board bonus. So cutting out some more cutscenes to help prevent spoilers, we come across our second to last fight, the Apostle of Creation. I decided I was going to try and use the previous strategy against Coco Beale, which was the Grigori on EN2, to where we continuously buff up Bacchus with the enhanced symbology. This works pretty well throughout the fight, and the Apostle of Creation doesn't have a whole lot of AoE attacks, but when he does attack, it hits really hard. Edge goes down several times throughout this fight, just 100 to 0. So as you can imagine, with Edge's HP pool the way it is, he would easily one-shot the rest of my party. And you'll sometimes notice that there's a debuff on Edge. This is really critical to use Cure Condition to remove this. This debuff makes him take extra damage, which is just bad for business all around. If Edge dies, then our DPS starts to die. If our DPS starts to die, it's probably going to be game over. Even without the debuff and using 2 end shelters on Edge to increase his defense, he still gets absolutely walloped. This fight wasn't particularly long. I think it was less than 10 minutes, but during the 10 minutes, it was a lot of healing and I really had to stay on my toes. I tried to use as little recovery items as I could because I know that the final fight is upcoming and I'm not sure how it's going to play out. After the fight, we get teleported onto a underground walkway and we avoid all of the bosses. You can check a guide to see where the bosses spawn. Once we reach the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, the run all comes down to this last fight. Sahariel stands between victory or defeat. Sahariel is resistance against dark, but he is weak versus light, which doesn't really help us at all. The only light damage character we have is Sarah, which we will be on healing priority for this fight. The boss's melee attacks include a chopping attack that strikes several targets in front of him for heavy damage, and he can also come crashing down for a wide area damage, and he may release his 6 hands to draw party members up into the air, strike them several times before the party members come crashing to the ground. And it's mostly this attack that I have a really hard time dealing with. The damage that it causes is immense. The boss's attacks are dependent on what color orb is at the bottom on the front of the boss, and there's 4 different colors. Personally, I didn't take the time to learn the attack patterns. I just kind of wanted to wing it and heal through the damage. Also similar to the Grigori Coco Beale, we have to destroy the orbs before we can actually deal damage to him. So for this reason, again, Bacchus's termination is a really good fit. A couple seconds into the fight, Edge gets absolutely deleted within seconds. So it was at this moment I knew that I had to keep in shelter on most of the time when I was able to try and keep our melee up. I did try and keep another melee in the fray as well, just for the enemy AI to try and target that member rather than Bacchus if Edge were to fall. For the rules I have set in place, I think the most challenging part about this fight was just the amount of healing that I need to do. Because the item usage has a cooldown and symbology takes a while to cast, after about 20 minutes I started to develop a little bit of a different strategy. So I pulled in a second healer, Limel, and I set her to manual and I put her off to the side as well, so that way I can cycle between Sarah and Limel for healing. This fight also kind of showcases that it was such a good decision to use the HP boost on Edge. If I used it on any other character, also that if that character wasn't melee, I really don't know if this run would have been doable with this rule set. I tried to keep Bacchus with at least 2 to 3 enhances as much as possible for that damage increase on termination, and we also tried to use 1 to 2 in shelters on Edge with also an in shelter on Bacchus. With the amount of damage that this boss outputs, it was really difficult to try and keep them sustained with healing and trying to increase their stats at the same time, which is also again why we brought in a second healer. We occasionally do get hit with fog, which does need to be cured immediately. With fog, it essentially makes your characters blind, and so they'll randomly launch their skills in a direction that is most likely not towards the boss. And we have 2 characters that can cure this along with items. So Edge and Sarah has cure condition, and we also have glow sticks as an item that we can use to cure fog. Maintaining this strategy, I felt pretty confident that we were able to defeat the boss, but I wasn't sure how long this fight would actually last. By the time the boss falls, it took us 39 minutes to down this fight, and we have now completed our victory condition of defeating the final storyline boss. So the question we asked at the beginning of the challenge run was, can you beat StarOcean, the Last Hope, using only party members' damage? And yes, we absolutely can. Despite the editing possibly making this look easy, this was the most challenging and frustrating challenge run that I've had so far. Some of these boss fights taking 30 plus minutes, running out of items, the fear of losing out on progression towards the end. This was a real challenge run. It was just really, really good. It was also extremely frustrating. If or when I'm to do another challenge run of this game, I think it might be on the next difficulty. So for those of you who aren't familiar with StarOcean, most of the time in the games, if not all of the games, once you beat the story, you unlock the next difficulty, and then you beat that story, and then it unlocks the final difficulty. I know it's there for the later StarOcean games, but for this game, with the next difficulty, I think using this rule set, I could possibly still beat the game now that I've kind of had a refresher on what these bosses do. I would still be using the HP boost on Edge, most likely, because he can also learn Taunt, and using Taunt on him manually doesn't break the rules because it doesn't do any damage. So if we were to do that, and then we would also be using the critical hit on Bacchus, as well as using the chain combos book on Bacchus as well instead of Raimi. If I recall, there is a quest as well that we can do to get another chain combos. I didn't do that quest. I kind of started skipping out on a lot of the quests because a lot of the quests require you to use the item creation to complete, so again, that would break the rules. If you're still watching this video after 43 minutes, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this challenge run and seeing what I've been able to do with this game. I would truly appreciate it if you let me know in the comments below how you came across this particular video. I do have 2 other challenge runs in the description below, and I'll keep updating the descriptions on the videos as I complete more and more challenge runs. Additionally, in the description, I do have a link to my socials, as well as in my Discord, there's a particular channel for challenge runs to where you can give your advice or inputs as to what you would like to see from a challenge run perspective. I'd really like to hear from you. And possibly if you've done your own challenge runs, I'd like to see what kind of rules you yourself put in place. And so what's next on the horizon for challenge runs? I've got a list of RPGs right now. That includes Final Fantasy X-2, Final Fantasy 2, 5, or 13, Dragon Quest 11. I've never played a Dragon Quest game, but it looks kind of fun. Sea of Stars, Chained Echoes, maybe something to do with the Dot Hack series. That would be a pretty long playthrough since there's, I believe, 7 games for it. I'm not including the last recode. That's not even a game. There's the FF7 Remake and FF7 Integrated. There's Nier Automata, possibly Chrono Trigger. And I've never played any of the Atelier Ryza series, but that looks kind of fun as well. I'm not quite sure which one of those I'll choose. Maybe something Final Fantasy related. We'll see. But you can go ahead and follow me on the socials and you'll get up-to-date information as to what game we are doing next. Once more, thank you everyone for being here, and I would really appreciate it if you were to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And I hope to see you in the next challenge run. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.